The dining room at Auberge 17 smelled like money. Not the crass, obvious kind that announced itself in cologne and cufflinks, but the old, patient kind that had learned to whisper. Serena Vail had worked the floor long enough to tell the difference. She moved between tables with the particular economy of someone who had trained herself not to waste a single step, her dark hair pinned back precisely, her posture impeccable in the way that came not from pride, but from sheer professional discipline. The restaurant occupied the ground floor of a converted limestone building in Old Montreal, its exposed beams and low candlelight designed to suggest history without actually committing to any particular era. The chef, an imperious man named Godet, ran his kitchen like a surgical theater. The front-of-house manager, a lean woman called Prentice, ran the floor like a courtroom. And the guests ran everything else. It was a Thursday in late October when Harlan Voss walked in. Not the Harlan Voss from Serena's file of names and faces that Prentice drilled into them every Friday morning. This was a different man altogether, which is to say, he shared only a name with the man in that file, and none of the grace. Serena would learn his name from the reservation, Dacre Collingwood. She would learn everything else within the first 4 minutes of the table being seated. He came with 3 others, 2 men in their 40s who had the carefully assembled look of people paid to seem agreeable, and a woman in a charcoal blazer who said nothing but watched everything. Collingwood himself was perhaps 55, silver-haired, in the way that had clearly been cultivated rather than accepted, with the broad shoulders of a man who still played squash 3 mornings a week and wanted everyone to know it. He pulled out his own chair before the host could reach him. He sat without looking at the host. He picked up the menu before anyone had offered it. Serena approached the table at precisely the right moment, not too eager, not too delayed. She had learned that timing in this room was everything. "Good evening," she said. "Welcome to Auberge 17. My name is Serena, and I'll be taking care of you tonight. May I start you with still or sparkling water?" Collingwood did not look up from the menu. "Sparkling," he said, "and tell whoever's running the cellar tonight that if the burgundy list is the same as last spring, I'm going to be deeply disappointed." One of the agreeable men laughed. The woman in the blazer did not. "Of course," Serena said. "I'll bring you the updated wine list as well. We've had several recent additions I think you'll find interesting." She moved away before he could respond. She had learned that trick too. Leave while you're still ahead. The truth about Serena Vail, which none of the guests at Auberge 17 knew, and very few people anywhere knew, was that she had once been on her way to becoming something else entirely. She had been accepted to the doctoral program in comparative literature at McGill at 23. An offer that had arrived in her inbox on the same afternoon her mother had called from Winnipeg to tell her that Serena's younger brother, Pascal, had been diagnosed with a degenerative muscular condition that would require ongoing, expensive care. Their father had left years before. Their mother worked as a school secretary. The math had not been complicated. Serena had deferred once, then twice. Then the deferral had simply calcified into something permanent, the way that temporary things sometimes do when life keeps offering you reasons to postpone. She was 31 now. She had been at Auberge 17 for 3 years. She was, by every measurable standard, excellent at her job, and she had made a private, unspoken peace with the fact that the version of herself who had read Proust in the original French and written a thesis draft on the semiotics of hospitality in 19th century fiction now spent her evenings pouring Burgundy for men like Dacre Collingwood. Most nights, that peace held. The first hour of the dinner was unremarkable. Serena took their orders. Collingwood chose the duck, unsurprisingly, and made a small production of asking about the sauce that she answered with the exact combination of deference and expertise that Prentice called the sweet spot. The wine she recommended was accepted after a brief performance of deliberation. The two agreeable men ordered quickly and thanked her. The woman in the blazer asked about the fish preparation in a way that suggested she had asked before and been disappointed before. It was during the appetizers that things began to shift. She had come to refill the bread basket, an unremarkable act, one she performed perhaps 40 times a night, when she caught the edge of Collingwood's voice dropping to the particular register that men like him used when they wanted to be overheard by some people and not others. "You know the real problem with service culture in this country," he was saying, turning his wine glass slowly by the stem, "is that everyone working the floor thinks they deserve something. Some entitlement to what, exactly? A thank you? Recognition?" He glanced briefly at Serena's hands as she set the bread basket down. "They're filling water glasses. They're carrying plates. The nobility of labor is a beautiful myth that the left invented to make people comfortable with stagnation." One of the agreeable men made a small sound of consideration, which was as close to disagreement as his employment apparently permitted. The woman in the blazer said nothing, but Serena noticed that she had stopped eating. Serena straightened, smiled, asked if there was anything else they needed, and returned to the service station. She stood at the pass for a moment. Through the small window above the counter, she could see the October night, the wet cobblestones of the street outside, a couple walking arm in arm under an umbrella. She thought about Pascal, about the physiotherapy appointments she drove him to on Sunday mornings, about the specific cost of his medication, which she knew the way some people know their PIN number. Reflexively, completely. She went back to her other tables. The breaking point, when it came, arrived in the way that breaking points usually do in rooms like this, quietly, with crystal and candlelight all around it. It was the main course. Collingwood's duck had arrived precisely as ordered. Serena was managing 3 other tables and had handed this one to a colleague named Bastien for the first plates. But she returned for the wine check, a reflex, a habit, a point of professional pride that she couldn't quite extinguish even on the nights she most wanted to. She arrived at the table to find the atmosphere subtly altered. The 2 agreeable men were both looking at their plates. The woman in the blazer, who Serena had learned was called Ingrid, and who worked in Collingwood's legal department, had the expression of someone who has decided to become invisible. Collingwood was speaking in French, not ordinary French, not conversational Montreal French, which Serena had grown up with, and which had its own particular music. This was formal, elevated, deliberately archaic, the kind deployed for effect, not communication. He was speaking to the woman beside him, and the cadence suggested he did not expect to be understood by the staff. "Elle est jolie, je suppose," he said, with a half-glance in Serena's direction, "mais ce type-là ne sait jamais rien de plus que ce qu'on lui dit de savoir. Une belle façade." Rian deadens. "She's pretty enough, I suppose, but that type never knows more than what they're told to know. A lovely façade. Nothing inside." Serena refilled the nearest wine glass. Her hand was completely steady. She was aware, in the peripheral and total way of someone whose attention has become very focused, that Ingrid had looked up. That one of the agreeable men had developed a sudden interest in the middle distance, that the table nearest to them, a couple celebrating what appeared to be an anniversary, had gone slightly still. She finished refilling the glass. She set the bottle down. She allowed herself one breath, and then, in the same measured, pleasant tone she used for everything else in this room, she spoke. "Je vous remercie, monsieur," she said, and she watched his face register the French with a small flicker of surprise. Not enough to constitute acknowledgement, just enough, and then she continued, smoothly, without pause, in the particular register of formal French that she had learned not in a classroom, but in 3 years of independent study, during a period when she had needed something to hold on to. Bien que je dois vous dire que dans la littérature du 19e siècle, la façade, justement, la surface, l'apparence, était souvent l'endroit le plus riche de sens. Balzac y revenait sans cesse. Il trouvait que ceux qui présumaient voir au-delà de la surface se trompaient, la plupart du temps, sur ce qu'ils regardaient. Which was to say, thank you, sir, though I should mention that in 19th century literature, the facade, the surface, the appearance, was often where the richest meaning resided. Balzac returned to it endlessly. He found that those who presumed to see past the surface were usually mistaken about what they were looking at. The silence that followed was of the particular quality that Serena had come to think of as crystalline, fragile and complete, the kind that holds its shape for exactly 1 moment before the world decides what to do with it. Collingwood looked at her, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time since he had sat down. "You study French literature," he said. In English, as if resetting the terms of the conversation. "I was accepted to a doctoral program," Serena said, with the same pleasantness, "at McGill, some time ago." She picked up the wine bottle. "Is there anything else I can bring you?" Ingrid found her at the service station 20 minutes later. "I want to apologize," she said without preamble. "For what he said, I should have said something at the table." "You don't need to apologize," Serena told her. "I know I don't need to," Ingrid said. "I'm doing it anyway." She paused. "He's always like that. I've worked for him for 6 years, and I keep thinking it'll become less." She stopped. "It doesn't become less." Serena looked at her for a moment. Ingrid had the face of someone who had made several significant compromises and was still accounting for them. "The fish was good?" Serena asked. Ingrid blinked. Then something shifted in her expression, something that might have been the beginning of a laugh, or of something else entirely. "The fish was excellent," she said. "What happened next did not happen that night, or the night after, or even that week. It happened 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday, when a man Serena did not recognize came into Auberge 17 for lunch and asked Prentice, very specifically for the server named Serena. Prentice, who did not take this kind of request lightly, came to find her in the back with an expression of careful neutrality. "There's a man at table 9, she said, "asking for you by name. He says he's a friend of Ingrid Roberge. His name was Laurent Beauchamp." He was perhaps 60, with the quiet, considered manner of someone who listened more than he spoke. He ran a small but highly regarded publishing house that specialized in translated literature. French and English, back and forth across the narrow national corridor, and he was looking, he explained, for an editorial assistant who could do what most people in his experience could not, read deeply in both traditions, understand the original and the translation as distinct literary objects, and have the patience to sit with the space between them. Ingrid had told him about Serena, not about the incident with Collingwood, or not only about that. She had told him about McGill, about the thesis draft, about what Serena had said about Balzac, which Ingrid had apparently written down somewhere. "I don't have any professional editorial experience," Serena said honestly. "I know," Laurent said. "What I'm looking for isn't experience. It's a particular kind of attention. Ingrid thinks you have it. I suspect she's right." Serena looked at him across the small table. Through the window, Old Montreal went about its quiet Tuesday business, a delivery van, 2 women with strollers, the particular grey light of a November noon that made the limestone look like something very old and very patient. "I can't leave immediately," she said. There are considerations, financial ones. I'd need some time to transition." "That's fine," Laurent said. "Take whatever time you need." She thought about Collingwood. Not with bitterness. She had moved past that, or far enough past it, that the distance felt like progress, but with the specific, clarifying memory of his voice in the dining room, the casual certainty with which he had looked at her hands and decided what they told him about what was inside her. She thought about Balzac, and about surfaces, and about the things that are most deeply hidden in the places that people most confidently presume to see through. She thought about Pascal, and about Sunday mornings, and about the specific persistence required to keep wanting things when circumstances keep suggesting you should stop. "Okay," she said. Laurent nodded as if this had been the answer he expected, and reached for the menu. "In the meantime," he said, "I've been told the duck here is exceptional." She gave Prentice 3 weeks' notice. Prentice accepted it with the quiet respect she reserved for things she disagreed with but understood. On her last shift at Auberge 17, a Friday in December with snow beginning to settle on the cobblestones outside, Serena worked the floor with the same precision and economy she had brought to it for 3 years. She refilled glasses and timed her approaches and read the temperature of each table the way you read weather. Not from a single sign, but from the accumulation of small details that only make sense when you have learned, over time, how to look. She thought, not for the first time, that this was perhaps not such a different skill from what Laurent needed, that reading a room and reading a text were versions of the same attention, that the space between what was said and what was meant was something she had been trained to navigate, in one way or another, for most of her adult life. Near the end of service, a couple at table 4 asked her what she would recommend for dessert. She told them, and they thanked her with the warmth of people who had noticed something about the evening that they couldn't quite name. She brought them the tarte au sucre. She cleared the last tables. She folded her apron. She said goodbye to Bastien, who hugged her, and to the prep cook who had always saved her a coffee during the lull before service, and to Prentice, who shook her hand with both of hers and said simply, "Don't waste it." She walked out into the December night. The snow had thickened while she'd been inside, and Old Montreal had gone soft at the edges, the way cities do when the first real snow of winter settles in, quieter, slower, all the hard lines temporarily dissolved. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment and breathed in air that tasted clean and cold and entirely new. Somewhere across the city, her brother was probably asleep. Tomorrow she would call him and tell him about the job, and he would say something that made her laugh because he almost always did, and she would think again about how it was possible to hold difficulty and love in the same hand without either one cancelling the other out. She began to walk. Behind her, through the warm-lit windows of Auberge 17, the dining room continued its careful, candlelit theatre, the low hum of conversation, the precise choreography of service, the particular performance of wealth pretending to be ease. She didn't look back. She had already learned everything she needed to know about what was inside that room. It was time to find out what was in all the others.